Welcome to Human Powered, the podcast about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. I'm Trenton Moss, leadership coach, exited agency founder, and author of the book Human Powered. And on my podcast, my guests spill their secrets about how they've created high-performing teams and how this has translated into running a high-performing business. And today I have Tim Cameron-Kitchen, founder of Exposure Ninja. Tim, hello there.
Hey Trenton, how's it going?
I'll quickly introduce you, Tim. So 12 years ago, you built a WordPress website for your next door neighbor. And this website did so well in Google that it transformed his life. And then you went on to write a best-selling book called How to Get to the Top of Google. And off the back of that, you founded your agency, Exposure Ninja, starting off doing £200 a month SEO projects with plumbers. Fast forward 12 years, and your book has now sold 50,000 copies. And your agency, Exposure Ninja, is now doing 30K a month engagements with multinationals. You've got 80 people in the UK and the Philippines. You've won a ton of awards. And really interestingly, last year you handed over the reins of the business to your then COO, Charlie. Let's get right into this. You've got this high-performing business and therefore I assume a high-performing team. What's the secret to having this high-performing team?
Well, when you say it all like that, Trenton, it sounds so linear and planned and wonderful and seamless. Of course, along the journey has been lots of learnings and difficulties, and every improvement, every development that we've made and every new thing that we've done has basically come as a result of making a mistake. We're very self-reflective, I guess, and one of our values is that we're obsessed with improvement, and we really are absolutely obsessed with improvement. And I think that's not just a company value, but that's also one of the values that we see in the people inside the business that tend to do the best. So I've always sort of been quite aware of the things that I'm good at and the things that I'm not good at. And I give myself very little credit for our growth other than, I wrote the book initially and I figured out a way of getting this plasterer's website ranked at the top of Google, which did quite well. And then pretty much after that, as soon as we started hiring people, my default sort of mechanism has been to find people who are really good at the things that I'm not. And I know this is such a cliche and such an often, it's a well-worn path in these sorts of podcasts, but it's to find people who are really good at the things I'm not. Of course, that means that you have to be fairly aware of the things that you're not good at first, and then just really leave them to get on with their jobs and to not try and micromanage them or not try and second guess them. And I think we've seen some stories throughout the business where that's worked really well. So, for example, Charlie, who you mentioned, took over as CEO last year. She originally joined in 2014 as an entry-level content writer. I just figured out how to get our clients mentioned in publications online, and this was called digital PR, and we were doing digital PR in 2014. I needed someone to sort of take over my process that I'd built. Charlie seemed to be pretty good. I hired her from Upwork. And she was really capable. Very quickly, it was clear that she was good at things that I wasn't. She was very organized. She started to look at the process. She started to look at not just the process that she was running, but she started to look a little bit outside as well and try and help me fix the business in different ways. So I said, right, well, this digital PR thing seems to be going somewhere. You can run the department. So she did that excellently. And then eventually we had a conversation in maybe 2017, which was, well, do you want to sort of run the business as a general manager? She was a bit nervous, but I knew that she could do it because she was good at all the things that I could see we needed. And so she did that and then became COO a bit later on. And then last year, actually after a full start the year before, I said, I don't think I'm the long-term CEO for this business, so you need to take over. And that was just, that was how we always tend to work in Exposure Ninja. All of the SLT, actually, except for one person, which is very recent, have been promoted from within. And in fact, all of our managers, except for one have been promoted from within. They've all started at lower level roles and we've sort of promoted them up. So I don't think there's any one secret. I think it's just showing up every day and trying to find the things that are most broken and fixing them, and then moving on to the things that are next most broken. And it's not particularly fun or glamorous, but if you do it every day, then eventually you look back and say, all right, we've started something here. It's not as terrible as it was 2 days ago.
It's interesting, Tim. You talked about hiring people that can do things that you can't do and get out their way. I think it's more than just that based on your answer. It's about identifying people's talents and what they can offer the business that they're not currently offering the business, and making it clear to them you can do this, and empowering them to take steps forward and develop.
Yes, actually, that's one of my favorite feelings in business, is when someone comes back to me after they've just been promoted into something and they say, I didn't think I was quite ready for that, or I felt a bit nervous, or I was a bit hesitant about taking that on. And I've noticed that frequently I will believe in somebody maybe more than they believe in themselves about taking a new opportunity. And I think part of that is like I look at their skills and I compare their skills in some areas to mine. And I'm like, well, if I can do this, like, you can definitely do it. And part of it is just, I think we do really well with people who are intrinsically motivated. So we're a completely remote business and always have been. And that means, and my tendency is there's like a spectrum between micromanagement and abdication. And I'm definitely more towards the abdication side of management. I'm very disinclined to go and check up on people and do that type of thing. So I've always known that I need someone who's intrinsically motivated. I'm not going to stand over behind someone and beat them with a stick and say we need to do this, and it's just not that type of environment. So I've always recognized that we need people who thrive in that environment, and that isn't people who need to be told 5 times a day, where is this? Those people don't tend to do that well inside exposure and injury. It doesn't mean they're bad people, because actually some, you look at sports, you get some fantastic people who have to have a manager that constantly motivates them and pushes them and, does that stuff. That's just not our style. So I think it's about recognizing the characteristics and tendencies of you as the owner or the leader or the manager, and then making sure that you're hiring people that are going to fit in your environment and that aren't going to take advantage or not work, really.
I want to pick up on the micromanagement to abdication spectrum. How do you get the balance between not micromanaging them, but not leaving them to kind of drown all by themselves?
I think regardless of your approach, you always have to make sure that they know that there is support there, and that they know if they feel like they're drowning, they know which lever to pull or what to say or how to go about that to get the support that they need. So I feel like that's a given, whichever side of the tendencies you go. I think that the spectrum of micromanagement to abdication is even more important in the remote environment. And I think I remember listening to a Dan Kennedy talk about 15 years ago, and what he'd been doing was talking to people about he had a client, he's a marketer, but he'd had a client in the convenience store recovery space. So this was basically a security company in convenience stores. And the story that he told was basically in the US, the theft from convenience stores is about equivalent to the net profit in the convenience stores. And the majority of this is not from shoplifters, this is from staff inside the companies. And he always said that if you have 100 people, 10 of them will lie, steal, cheat. They're just bad people. They will take any opportunity, even if they don't feel that it's justified or necessary. That's just who they are. 10% of people are ruthlessly honest to a fault. And like if they're hungry and there's a loaf of bread in front of them, but it doesn't belong to them, they will just die rather than eat the bread. And then 80% of people are situationally honest. And I've kind of found that, which means that, by the way, they will, under the right circumstances, they will act honestly. If their circumstances dictate that it's possible and that there's no negative impact on the person that they're stealing from, they will steal. And I've always kind of taken that approach with staff as well. And I think the same sort of spectrum comes with motivation. 10% of people are just fundamentally motivated all the time. 10% of people are fundamentally demotivated. And it doesn't matter what you do, they're just never going to get there. And 80% of people are sort of situationally motivated. And I think whether we're talking about honesty or whether we're talking about motivation, in a remote environment, the answer to all of this is basically process. And I don't mean that, everyone's just a robotic person work unit that must be programmed to perform particular tasks. And, I'm talking about like, what's the management process in there? So what's the cadence of meetings? In Exposure Ninja, we're very process driven with the work that we do for clients. So we have task lists which determine all of the work that needs to be carried out. And inside each subtask, there is a piece of training on how to do that thing, and there's what to look for. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to give our team a framework that they can work in. And it doesn't mean that you can never go outside this or you can't add your creativity, but here's the baseline of what is expected for this task and exactly how to do it. And I think if you've got that type of approach, it allows you to, I guess, micromanage a little less, because you're not having to check up on someone 5 times a day. Oh, have you done that keyword research? Let's have a look at it. I know that they've followed the process. And of course, as long as there's like periodic check-ins and, other people in the team are reviewing or QAing or, it's going through editorial or whatever, issues get picked up anyway. But it means that you don't have to just be constantly on people. And it means that they've got a framework which they can thrive in, even if they're not sort of sat next to you on a table while you're talking through, how to do a particular task. So I think you've got to build an environment that works for your tendencies and that works for your company's setup. And, a lot of this stuff probably wouldn't be necessary in a more in-person environment, but because we've always been remote, we sort of had to build for that, really.
I love the analogy of that 10% of people fundamentally motivated. It almost doesn't matter what you do. They're going to go for it. 10% of people fundamentally demotivated. Doesn't matter what you do. They're going to be that way. And then you're working really for those 80% to make sure that they've got everything that they need to make sure they're firing on all cylinders.
Yes, you have to. And you're going to pick up people along the way who are in a demotivated camp, and you need to be able to recognize them and, coach them or coach them out. And the 10% that are fundamentally motivated, they are probably going to be the ones that are going to thrive. Like Charlie is in that group. She's just intrinsically motivated. She's an absolute beast. Everything she does, whether it's bouldering or cooking or traveling or work, she does at the highest level that she possibly can. And the same is true across our management and SLT. So I think you're looking for people who are in that top 10% bracket who will tend to take on more, they'll care more, they'll do the things that maybe they haven't been asked to do. And those are the people that, at least for my personality type and the organization that we've built, I'll be looking at, all right, what can I do to give them a little bit more responsibility each day so that eventually, they're ready to do something that maybe they didn't think that they were capable of doing a little while ago.
So I think you're saying identify that top 10%. And for you, that's people who take on more, who care more, who proactively do things they're not asked to do. Help them to progress in the business in a way that perhaps they weren't sure that they were able to, but you can see the potential. And then for the remaining 80%, the situational motivated people, make sure we've got really good process in place to keep their motivation levels up. What about that remaining 10%, the fundamentally demotivated? How do you deal with that group?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, and I'm not sure that we've nailed it. There's the American saying, hire slow, fire fast. I don't know if you've ever tried to fire underperforming people in the UK fast. It's not generally the easiest thing to do. You have to go through, processes. And again, you need processes for all this stuff. Firstly, are they clear that they're underperforming? Are they clear that they're not meeting expectations? They absolutely have to be clear. And then it's an HR question of what's the process that you take people through, performance reviews, putting them on PIPs, going through all of that stuff, making sure everything's documented, and eventually reaching a conclusion about whether they're a good fit for the business or not. I think the danger is that you tolerate underperformance and bad attitudes. And I think we've been good as a business at sort of recognizing people that haven't had the best attitudes, because it doesn't just impact the work that they do. It can impact clients. So we've had, important roles like account managers. We've had account managers that have sort of been this way over the years. And what will end up happening is their campaigns will end up underperforming, and the other people on those accounts will, they will also underperform. And you get this sort of folding in effect where actually the impact of one bad apple, I guess, starts to spread. So I think you've really got to police this carefully. And also, if you notice that someone is a bad performer, mitigate the damage. If you've got suspicions about someone, you can't just let them go immediately. So you need to make sure that there's a second pair of eyes on that, or to make sure that people have got, an escalation point. You've got to sort of build a protective environment around that person to make sure that they don't, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but poison the rest of it, because you have to guard against these things. But obviously, before you can guard against them, you have to notice them. So you need to make sure that everyone in the organization is completely tuned to that type of thing.
How do you identify, who that top 10% is, who the middle 80% are, and who the fundamentally demotivated 10% is?
There's a bunch of things that we do inside Exposure Ninja. For example, Vic, our amazing director of people, runs things like consistency forums where we're looking for performance across different departments, or we're regularly sort of looking out for superstars. So there's a bunch of sort of operational stuff there. I think in the early days of the business, this was more just about communication, and it was about showing that you care. And I think what tends to happen is if you show that you care about things and people notice that you care, then that kind of becomes the default. And then anyone who isn't like that sort of stands out a bit more. And this is something that we've noticed with various roles over the years, is that they've actually evolved over time as the business has grown. So you mentioned that we started off doing really small pieces of work for plumbers that ordinarily, unless you're a tiny business, makes absolutely no sense doing a monthly campaign for someone for £100 or £200, particularly if 100 of that is going into ad budget. But then you need a certain type of person to work in an organization like that. And then as you grow and you're working with multinational brands on much more complex and competitive campaigns, you need a completely different type of person. And as the business evolves, the people also need to evolve. And I think we've noticed over the years that maybe some people haven't been able to keep up with that change. Someone who is really well suited at the start isn't so well suited at the end, and it becomes apparent that we're sort of pushing them outside of their comfort zone, and they're not able to catch up. And in some cases, they don't want to catch up. So I think it's about making sure that you're having honest conversations as a leadership team, and you're having honest conversations with the people who are managing folk so that they can identify this type of thing. And then, of course, being a leader is about setting an example and acting publicly how you want your teams to act, because that's the only way that they know, how we do things around here, is they look up and they see, well, how's that person doing stuff? And if you're, clocking off at 2 p.m. to go and play golf, well, you're setting an expectation of this is how we work. I remember a situation with one of our salespeople where people email me and I'll just answer their questions. If they've got a question about Exposure Ninja, or they've got a question about digital marketing, I'll just answer it. If they send me their website and they want some feedback, I'll just give them some feedback. And I remember one of our salespeople saw an email that someone had sent me, and I just answered the question. I think it was about SEO or something. I answered the question, gave them some advice, and the feedback from this guy was, wow, Tim didn't have to do that, and there's no financial incentive to do that. This person who'd inquired wasn't a lead for us. That they couldn't afford what we were doing. So, he was sort of surprised by that. Like, why would Tim even do that? But also encouraged by that. And the feedback was, we're actually supposed to care. I thought that was just like a thing that we said. Oh no, we're actually supposed to care. And that made me realize that actually, as a sort of leader, you're under a bit more of a spotlight than you think you are. And the behaviors that you exhibit, I wasn't doing that to be like, hey, everyone, by the way, just to let you know, I've emailed this person and this ties in with our core value. This was just an email on our ticket system that he happened to see. I don't even know how he saw it. But if you're acting consistent with the values that you want the agency to have, other people will either align with those, or they'll really start to stand out. And when they really start to stand out, as long as your team know what to do in that situation, then you can protect your company DNA.
I think what you're saying is have these values that you've created, and then you as the leader, you need to be an exemplar, and that's when people will buy into them.
Yes, and I think we have the values that you created. I think that's another one of the lessons that we learned, is that previously I thought we need to create our values. I need to work out what values should we have. And I'd always sort of set the values for the company based on this. What really changed for us and actually made values stick, because we'd never really managed to make values or vision or any of that stuff really stick. What actually changed was when we first built the SLT, we had a session on what do we think our values sort of actually are. So trying to identify our values rather than choosing them. And that really helps. We got things that actually we sort of do believe in, and we believe them because we act them. So it was people saying, do you know what, actually, I think we are relentlessly proactive. I think we are obsessed with impact. I think, we are committed to enjoying the journey. We like working with each other. We want to work with clients that, and I've always thought we've only got one life. We may as well use it doing something that we actually enjoy with people that we actually enjoy working with. So it's more like a distillation of our experience in business that gave us our values, rather than saying like, starting with ChatGPT, what should my company values be? And then you get, right, transparency and credibility and trust. It's like, well, they're completely meaningless, aren't they? Because they've just come from outside rather than coming from inside. I think that's something I would definitely do again, is try and distill rather than enforce values.
Yes, so everyone kind of buys into them.
Yeah. Well, they're sort of living them. So it's almost like we just take the best bits of what we're already doing and amplify them. And of course, then it means that if we see someone exhibiting those values, we shout them out on Wednesday Wins or Thankful Thursdays or whatever, because we can see that someone is living our values. Whereas if it was like transparency, well, we've got to all try and act transparent, maybe if that's not natural to us, but if something sort of ambiguous or meaningless that you'd see written on some big corporate thing that some consultants have come in and given you, if it's not natural to you, it's like when a cat dresses up as a dog, you're like, you're not fooled for a second, are you? And you need to constantly keep reinforcing those things because they're not built in. Like, cat, you're still not acting like a dog. You're still not acting like a dog. Let's watch some videos of dogs and see how dogs behave. Like 6 months later, we're just not getting any traction with this cat dog thing. Well, it's because the freaking cat's a cat. Like, you need to work out what the core is first, and then just live more of that, I think.
You very casually mentioned a couple of things there. Wednesday Wins, Thankful Thursdays, I think. So tell me a bit about those, and I guess a bit more about, as a remote first business, how do you retain your culture?
Yeah, this is a good question, and I've been talking to lots of agencies about acquiring them, and this is something that they often, particularly an agency that's either purely in person or hybrid, they have questions about how you retain a culture and how you actually build a culture. My answer is always that in a remote business, yes, some culture happens sort of organically, but actually I think you do have to work hard, and culture is a bit more intentional. And you have to have people, like we've got people whose job is essentially to do things that reinforce our culture, which I don't think we have if, people are just banging into each other in the office and going out for drinks afterwards. We don't have any of that. So we need to sort of build things. And a couple of them that we've created are things like Wednesday Wins and Thankful Thursday. So each of these came from a different, and again, you can see our sort of analytical and quite self-reflective place. But Wednesday Wins came from, because our campaign teams work on, specific clients, and we don't all like have a get together on Friday where we all just sit around and listen to leadership talking about themselves and mention the best clients or whatever. We don't have that stuff. So how do we distribute information about success around the organization? Well, we built this Wednesday Wins thing, which on Wednesdays we share wins from the campaigns that we've worked on. These can be tiny things like client absolutely loved this lead magnet, we built them, or it could be big things like we just tripled this business's revenue in like 6 months. Or, they can be big things, they can be little things. But the point is people share in our water cooler channel their Wednesday Wins. And Thankful Thursdays, one of the sort of insights that led to this is we noticed that some teams that weren't necessarily client facing, they weren't like the typical rock stars in an agency. So for example, we got a support team that works behind the scenes on all the admin. They keep the whole thing running. They're like the mortar in the house, right? When you look at a house, you don't go, wow, what fantastic mortar. You go, what beautiful bricks or what incredible windows. Well, like the sales team are the windows and the accounts team are the bricks. You don't look at the mortar, and the support team are the mortar. So we were like, well, how do we sort of get a bit more attention? How do we spread this this sort of recognition of the work that people are doing? So, right, well, Thankful Thursdays. Everyone in the company knows someone who's done something good or something that they're grateful for. So this might be an account manager saying, I was off on Tuesday and someone filled in for me and the client said they absolutely had a great call with them or whatever. Or it could be, we really couldn't get into this particular Amazon account and the support team helped me out. It's anything like that, but it's just a way of, I guess, normalizing success in the Wednesday wins and sort of gratitude and camaraderie in the Thankful Thursdays. And, they're just two things. And I'm not saying that they're absolutely transformational and without them we'd be nothing and with them we are world beaters. But those are just examples of, I think, conscious initiatives that as a remote business we have to do in order to try and replace some of that culture which you'd get organically in an in-person business.
So you've got these mechanisms in place to bring people together. I'm wondering, Tim, how do you then point everyone in the right direction? And by that, I mean in the direction that the business wants to go and where you're headed as an organization.
Yeah. And again, I think this is slightly more difficult, or it requires conscious effort in a remote business where people are just sort of, they open their laptop and they might not talk to anyone in person that day. There's a few things that we do. So we have like a shared vision and some goals that Charlie shares with the company. And then we have I think it's a it might be bi-monthly. I think it used to be quarterly meeting called Dojo Unite, which is where we get all of the management and SLT to share campaign successes and things that have been going on in their different departments so that the whole business can see, all right, this is the direction that we're going in. These are the things that we're working on. These are our priorities. We have monthly newsletters. Again, the point of that was to, it's not necessarily obvious what's going on in other departments, what other improvements and progress that other teams are making. So in the monthly newsletters, we share all of those. So everyone's got visibility on the sort of direction that we're going in. We each have sort of annual KPIs, and then we'll do a quarterly review with everyone where we're looking at how they're progressing against their KPIs. Then all of those KPIs are designed to sort of cascade down from the company goals as well. So we're basically just constantly trying to, there's a GIF that I often use, which is someone's got a bunch of kittens and they're trying to get them in a line and the kittens are just wandering off. And this person's constantly picking up the kittens and putting them back in a line, picking up the kittens and putting them back in a line. And I think that's not a bad metaphor for how you have to be with this sort of division type stuff. This isn't something that you do, because you watched a video over Christmas and you decided to have a big meeting on the 3rd of January. Now you got your vision and your goals and your plan for the year. And right, off we go, everyone. And then next year, you find out, watched another video. Didn't we do a vision thing last year? And you open the doc and there it all is. And it's basically out of date by the 4th of January. Like, I think this is something that you've got to sort of constantly keep, picking up the cats, putting them back in a line, like keep going like that. And then eventually you get somewhere or you don't, but at least you gave it a good go.
I love that analogy. You're doing all of these initiatives to keep your culture going, to unite everyone, to try and get the best out of everyone, to keep everyone pointing in the same direction as what the company vision is. You touched on this earlier. You talked a bit about, the company keeps moving and keeps evolving. So how do you keep your team's skills evolving so they stay as high performing? And I'm thinking in particular around leadership, emotional intelligence, resilience.
Historically, I always viewed training as something that was kind of task-based and therefore we could always do it internally. So for about, 8 years inside Exposure Ninja, we didn't have any external training. And the training that we did have was very sort of process-driven. It was, if this happens, do that. If you need to do this piece of work, then here's the template to do this. Or if you have this type of call, then here are the 3 things in your checklist to go through. And I hadn't really viewed external training as something that was necessarily useful. It all felt a bit corporate. It all felt a bit bullshitty to me. And then, since actually sort of listening to people and recognizing that not everyone is as whatever diagnosis I would be given, not everyone is the same way as me. Actually, we've brought in a lot more external training and things like the Crucial Conversations training. We've done some other leadership training as well, I think through Nottingham University, which has actually been really good. And I found it quite odd because it was so different to the sort of like, if this, then that type process stuff that works for me. So I was like, why are people getting a lot from this? This seems a bit sort of fluffy and ambiguous, but actually seeing that training make its way through the team and seeing people implement it, and being on what we'd always do is we'd have a training session, and afterwards we'd get together and think about, okay, what is this actually like? How does this apply? What are some situations where we might have acted differently? What are some situations where we may have used this? Immediately, it became apparent that this type of thing was really useful. So we've started doing a lot more of that type of thing than we previously did. And now I'm a full advocate. If someone wants to spend some money on external training, like, be my guest. We're putting our managers through CMI training. It's huge cost. It's like, I don't know, I can't remember how much it is, but it's thousands per person. And we've got, I don't know, 12 or so managers. So it's a decent chunky cost. It's definitely more than we spent on training for a while. But it's recognizing that if we're going to get to the next level, we need our people to get to the next level. And because we have always sort of hired from within, and I've never had a job before. So if I look in my head for my sort of leadership role models, it's basically like interviews with people on YouTube. That's basically it. I've never worked for anyone before. So I need to recognize that my skill set is capped at a certain level, and therefore the people underneath me, their skill set is also capped at a certain level. So if we're going to get beyond that, we need to bring something outside in. I've completely gone 180 on my approach to outside training, and that's been a really big part of it.
And when you do that, what do you see as being the impact with your client relationships?
I think it's difficult to isolate any particular impact into a certain job role. It's more about, do you know what it is? It's when I talk to managers, and not being in CEO, I'm not sort of doing this on a daily basis anymore, but talking to managers, and instead of being able to anticipate how they would do things, a lot of the time now I'm talking to them and I'm getting actually a better answer or a better response to a situation than I would have anticipated and that I would have been able to do. And that's the impact of outside influence, right? It can be incredibly reassuring. Like if you're training someone in SEO, for example, and you train them on all the things that they know how to do, and then you say, hey, you got this client, like, what was your approach here? And they give you exactly the response that you would have done. You feel like, oh, yeah, great. Okay, good. I've imparted everything I've got into this person, and they are now a clone of me. Whereas when you start adding outside stuff in, actually they all of a sudden become better than your response in that situation. Like their training data has exceeded your possible output. And I think that's when you start to get surprised by the quality of the management decisions. So I don't think I could isolate it in one particular example, but particularly relating to client relationships, but it's that type of thing that I think you're looking for. You're looking to be surprised by the quality of the decisions that are going on in your team.
Tim, you've shared so many wonderful anecdotes of what you've learned over the past 12 years on this really quite incredible journey that you've been on. So talk to us a bit about, now that you're no longer hands-on in the business, what's next for you, and also what's next for Exposure Ninja?
Yeah, I felt for a little while that my job as CEO, I wouldn't have necessarily applied for it. So I think there was a couple of things that made me think I need to hand this over. The first was I looked at my calendar and said, this is not a typical CEO's role. I'm spending a lot more time in marketing. I'm spending a lot more time on shiny objects than a CEO should do. Where's the day-to-day leadership? It's just not here. And I reflected on that and realized actually, because I don't consider myself to be a fantastic manager. And part of the reason is, it's just, I don't really enjoy it. Like I love our people, but I don't want to spend all day sort of having one-on-one conversations with people or any of that. Like my worst time of the quarter was the KPI time, when I had to meet with all the people and go through all their tasks. I just want to go and find something new, or like hunt and kill some new technology or whatever. Like that's the stuff that really energizes me. So I reflected and thought, firstly, if we put the CEO job description out, I wouldn't apply for that job. And then if I did apply for it, I wouldn't get it. And if I got it, by some freak miracle, I wouldn't last in that role because somebody would say, actually, you're not doing this description. So I realized that I needed to find someone to do this. And Charlie was obviously a natural successor. She'd sort of been with me throughout the journey at Exposure Ninja. I knew she could do it very simply. And for a few years before, actually, since the start of COVID, I'd had a goal to sort of to build a group of businesses. I'd always looked at, from working with a lot of businesses in loads of different industries, we've seen how digital marketing can have an incredible effect on people's growth. One of the things I'm most proud of is when we actually change lives by doing digital marketing. And it's like, oh, marketing never really changed anyone's lives. Yeah, but I know people who came to us and they're about to kill their business, and now the dude's got like a lift in his house. Right, that's sick. That is a life-changing thing. And just looking at things like that, where we've been able to do something amazing, I've always thought, wouldn't it be great if we were not just doing that for other businesses, we were actually sort of doing it for our own stuff as well. So I always wanted to kind of build a group, and eventually with the CEO thing and realizing I wasn't the right fit, I was like, I'm just going to have to do this. I'm 38 years old now. I don't want to be thinking, I'm going to start doing this at 68. I may as well just do it now and just see what happens, really. Exposure Ninja's in a good place. We're very good at what we do. We get a lot of leads. It's fine. It doesn't need me day to day. So that's what I decided to do. So I set up Shinobi Capital, which is the holding company of Exposure Ninja. Basically, 2 phases to my plan. First group, build an agency group where we buy some other agencies, help them grow, give them the support that they need, keeping them all separate, but giving them the support they need to grow. And then the second phase is to go and buy businesses in different industries that we know that we can help grow, and then use the agencies as the growth engine for that. Weirdly, phase 2 has actually happened already. And I've just made an agreement with a business, actually 2 companies in a completely different industry, which we're going to help grow. But yeah, I'm absolutely loving this. It ticks all my boxes. It's super engaging, looking inside lots of different businesses, figuring out lots of different problems. Every day is totally different, and I'm really enjoying it. Exposure Ninja is still doing incredibly well. We did a lot of stuff around AI and Google's AI overviews. We were the first agency in the world to work out how to rank in SGE as it was then, and now AI overviews, and share all that information online. We love that. Like I get really stuck into that type of thing. And then really we're just looking to be the best agency that we possibly can for our clients, keeping the relentless ROI focus and, doing what we do. So yeah, it's a bit of a different journey for me, and it's been quite an interesting experience, but I'm absolutely loving it, Trent. And it's like so engaging and super great to meet so many different agency folk as well.
Wow. So Tim, you shared so many things about your journey with Exposure Ninja. So what a 12-year journey you've been on. And it sounds like the next 12 years are potentially going to be even more exciting.
Yes. Well, I look through our Slack account and see like 60 or 70 clients and think, well, wouldn't it be cool if there was another 70 in there that were all businesses that we owned and we operated? But yeah, I'm going to see how far we can go before someone tells us we've overstepped, really. So that's my plan. We'll see how far we get.
Brilliant. Tim, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I've learned so many new things, and if you're listening, I'm sure you've learned a lot as well. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Trenton. Always a pleasure.
You've been listening to Human Powered, the podcast all about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. Thanks for tuning in.